following his bike was his body that was flopping over and over again.
Then I woke up 3 months later. My story starts on April 5th, 2005. My eldest son was in kindergarten, so we were going on our first father-son camping fishing trip that week. I came home and I thought I had forgot to make my deposit. So before I left to go camping, I jumped on my motorcycle and went to the bank to make my deposit. Then I woke up 3 months later.
It's a beautiful day. He says, I'm going to make one last deposit at the bank on my motorcycle. He hops on his motorcycle, as he's done many times before, and it was just not even a mile from our home, and he rode to the bank. During that time, our son was playing outside in the front yard with his friends, about 5 houses up from us, and I decided to go do some yard work in the front yard. I hear Ben coming down the road on his motorcycle. I look up and I see him coming, and as I looked away, I heard the most undescribable sound. I saw his bike fishtailing down the street, and following his bike was his body that was flopping over and over again. I could tell when I got there, his helmet, he had a full face helmet on. It was cracked from the back all the way to the front. His chin was the only part sticking out of the helmet. He was moaning, and he said he couldn't breathe. Neighbors came. Our son was right there in the front yard. He saw the accident. He actually waved to his daddy, so he felt that maybe he caused the accident. 911 came, and they took him to the hospital, took him to UK Hospital, where we were meted by the trauma team, ER trauma team. He had a lot of internal injuries that we didn't know of at the time. The trauma surgeon came and spoke to me and said that he's very injured and very sick, and he didn't know quite what to do, that he was going to put him on an ECMO machine, which is a heart-lung bypass, to let his heart and his lungs rest while the machine is kind of like a life support, do the work. I could only be in the ER waiting room, and we were flooded with church family and flooded with family. I think there was about 50 in the waiting room that day. He was losing so much blood. All I could tell people at that point was to donate blood. He ended up having 7 broken teeth, collapsed lungs, crushed pelvis, a compound fracture in his left wrist, several broken ribs, if not all of them. They took him to the trauma ICU, where he remained for a month and a half, I believe. He was on about 14 different drips. He coded several times in that month and a half in the ICU. They were so concerned more of his internal organs that they forgot really about the arm and the break. We were only allowed to go on his right side when I was able to visit, and one day I went to the left side and saw that his tips of his fingers were black, and addressed that to the ortho team, and they had to amputate. He was there was a huge infection that was just eating up his body. They didn't know where it was coming from. It eventually came from the arm as it was growing necrotic and making his whole body just resist everything. Had to have his abdomen open from the chest to his pelvis to release all the pressure, all the fluids that were building up inside. His kidneys were failing. He was on dialysis. His liver was failing. He was jaundiced. It was pretty hard to see him like that.
Something that I couldn't explain, that I had to ask a lot of questions of, was a time when I started being allowed to be awake and out of the coma, but still in the ICU. So if you came in my room, you had to be gowned, gloved, hats, everything, because I was so sick. And every day, for quite some time, there would be what I thought was a physician in that gaggle of people. Blue scrubs, younger looking guy, dark curly hair, and he would stand in the back of the room or to the side of the room while everybody was there. Well, when everybody left, he was still there. And he didn't have on the gloves, the gown, the caps, the glasses. He didn't have on all the protective equipment. And he would come over and he would grab my hand with his hand and he would practically lay on my chest, across my chest. And he would look at me. I can't explain the amount of comfort that I felt from that. Other than, I believe what the Bible says, that a comforter will be sent. And I also believe that God says, I can choose to reveal angels at times. Do I believe that that was an angel? Absolutely. But just the feeling of comfort, of thinking that things are going to be all right, and just feeling like somebody was communing with you, and feeling like somebody was talking to you and touching you and not afraid to touch you. Couldn't explain it. Can't be explained worldly. Can only be explained spiritually and biblically.
He was very sick. He coded multiple times. He had multiple blood transfusions. It came to a day that it was a Sunday during church service, and the trauma surgeon came to me and he said, there's nothing else I can do. He had tried everything, every medication, every surgery, everything that they could imagine. And he said, I'm sorry to tell you, but there's nothing else that I feel I can do. His blood pressure is 80/4. He's not getting any oxygen to his brain. If he survives, he would most likely be brain dead because of the lack of oxygen. He said, so I think it's time to gather the family and say goodbye. I called our friend and deacon and pastor at our church. They were in the middle of church service. I told them what was going on, and I said, just please pray. I didn't know what else to say. Myself, his mother and father all went back and said our goodbyes. And when I left, I asked the surgeon, if it was okay for my son to come back, if he wanted to, because at this point he had still not seen his dad, and just to say goodbye. And kids weren't allowed in the trauma ICU rooms, but they made an exception. And the nurses asked me if I wanted them to disconnect him from all the machines because they were pretty noisy, and take all the tubes and wires out of him, and they would pull up the sheet so our son wouldn't see the arm that was gone, and just so our son wouldn't have to see all that. And I went to answer, and I opened my mouth, and the word no came out very strong. And wait. I said, no, wait. And I didn't know what that meant, because I didn't know what to say. And I said, let me just talk to my son. And so we were placed in a private room, myself and my son. He was 6. And I put him on my lap facing me, and I told him that it was time to say goodbye to Dad, that Jesus wanted him home, and that Daddy would not be coming back to our house. Our son, crying and not understanding, said, and I said, Daddy's got to go to heaven and be with Jesus because Jesus wants him. And he said, can we all go to heaven and be together? And I said, not yet. So just reassuring him how much Daddy loved him, and told him that, it was okay if he wanted to go say goodbye and see him, but that Daddy didn't look like Daddy, and he had some machines and some tubes hooked up to him that was helping him stay alive, but I didn't want him to be scared. I just wanted him to know what he was seeing. And he said he did. He wanted to go see him and say goodbye. So at that point, we were just embracing. He was crying, I was crying, and we were just silent.
I had what many people call a near-death experience. I know because of the way I felt differently. And it is a peace that passes understanding. There were times when I had hallucinations. There were times when I had bad visions, and the heat and the misery was always there. The pain and the heat was always there. There was a time when I know for sure that I passed away. I was able to see the staff and physicians working on me. I was able to see the main physician that was taking care of me tell my family in the other room, on the other side of the ward, what had happened. I was gone. And it is like many people share. I felt that white light tunnel feeling to where I was present with a table. And that table had a bowl of fruit on it with my great-grandfather standing beside it, just as I remember him. And there is a feeling that is unlike any sense that we have here. And it feels like such a lackluster term, but it is contentment. We're not capable of contentment on this plane, because being with Christ as He intended it is ultimate contentment. Knowing that everything in the world is right in the way He created it, knowing everything in His relationship with you is right, is the way He created it. It was a short time. My great-grandfather that I saw raised his hand and said, "Not yet." And it was just like I fell back into my body. And I felt the heat. I heard the beeping sensors. I heard the people rushing around me saying, "He's back. We have a pulse." And then the pain all came back.
The surgeon busts through the door, and I mean busts through the door in our private conversation, and he says, "We have a pressure. We have a pressure. I don't know what's going on, but we have a pressure, and I've got to go work on him." So I pushed my son away from my face, and he looked at me and he said, "What just happened? What's going on?" And I said, "You just witnessed a miracle." So he did improve. His blood pressure did come up. His oxygen levels did come up. His vitals all came up. What is ironic, but not, because we know the Lord. Fast forward a little bit, I got all of Ben's medical records, and on that day, between that hour time period, I looked back, and at that point, there was a nurse with him 24/7, writing down every vital sign, every oxygen level, everything. During that hour that the doctor told me he was gone, and we were prepping my son to go see him, there was nothing written. It had stopped. But it picked up in the next hour. So that was nothing short of a miracle, and God's hand in that, in every situation. I knew Ben was going to be coming home. That's the peace I had. I didn't know in what condition, but I did have the peace that he would be coming home eventually. I didn't know when, I didn't know how that would look, but I did have that, and I held on to that. And with all the prayers, with all the support of our church family, of our neighbors and family, we had a friend that was a very godly friend, and he offered to sit in for Ben as we all laid hands on him and prayed over him. And I believe that. I believe the power in that because I saw it, witnessed it, so.
The other part of my story that I really like to share is when God says, "I won't just bless you, but I'll bless you abundantly." So I owned a plumbing company. Losing a limb would be very hard to go back to doing that type of work. I tried it, I could do it, but it wasn't sustainable. I eventually got on to working at UK. And I have risen through the ranks over the past 16 years. More doors have been opened for me than I could have ever opened for myself. So God not only took me through a trauma, He has sustained me as well and continues to sustain me. These blessings are not something that I could have generated on my own. It's not possible. It's not possible for me to have gotten these positions and career advancements that I've been able to get on my own. They are 100% from Him. And many people may look at my testimony and say, wow, what a big testimony, what a great thing, how God has worked in your life. And I would say this, I would say that God has just given me a visual interpretation of what He is wanting to do in everyone's life. We've all been given a death sentence. We have no ability to save ourselves eternally. It's all because of the sacrifice of His Son that's given us the ability to live and live abundantly.